The desert heat shimmered across Falcon Ridge training complex, but the real fire wasn't the sun. It was the laughter. Grandpa's museum piece. Private Derek Lawson jeered, pointing at the battered rifle in the old man's hands. The line of recruits erupted mocking, sneering, every head turning to watch the spectacle. 20 brand-new Marines, rifles gleaming, full of swagger. This was their day to prove themselves with America's most advanced weapons. And then came him, Raymond Callahan. Civilian jeans, faded t-shirt, cap pulled low, and in his hands, a relic, an M1D Garand, wood polished by time, steel scarred by decades of service. No rails, no bipods, no fancy glass, just iron and discipline. Someone get him a rocking chair before he throws out his beck. Lawson barked, earning another round of laughter. But when Callahan opened his weathered ammo box, sunlight revealed dozens of carved notches. The chuckles died instantly. One Marine whispered, almost afraid of the answer. Kill marks. Where are you watching from? Soldier, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you love hidden military legends, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next Untold story. Ray's expression didn't change. He just set the box down gently, as if it were a relic. He began checking each hand-loaded round. Brass casings dulled with age, the tips polished as though he'd touched them 1,000 times. At 35, Staff Sergeant Ethan Morales had seen his share of cocky recruits. Confidence usually bled away when the first rounds went downrange. But the sight of this old man with his relic, it made even Morales uneasy. He stepped closer, voice even but firm. Excuse me. Sir, I'll need to see your ID and range card. And what kind of rifle is that? Exactly. Ray lifted his head for the first time, eyes clear and unflinching. He handed over a card so old it looked like history itself. Morales read the name, blinked, then looked again. Master Sergeant Raymond Callahan. Service 1964 to 1994. Special operations capable. The laughter died in an instant, and for the first time that morning, Alpha Platoon realized the day's test wasn't theirs alone. Staff Sergeant Ethan Morales held the veteran's ID a moment longer than necessary. His thumb brushed across the faded laminate, over the words that suddenly silenced every ounce of bravado on the firing line. Master Sergeant Raymond Callahan, Special Operations Capable. Morales cleared his throat, professionalism wrapping around the curiosity in his eyes. All right, Sergeant Callahan. You've got a slot at lane 20. Targets are staged at 100, 300, 600, and 800 meters. His tone made it sound like a challenge, a dare wrapped in regulation. Ray just nodded, as if the numbers were familiar ground. The Marines beside him adjusted optics, tapped bipods into the sand, dialed turrets on ARCOGs and scopes. Everything about their rifles screamed technology and precision. The old Garand beside them looked prehistoric. No rail systems, no glass, just wood and steel. And yet, the way Ray shouldered it made the weapon seem alive, like he'd been carrying it his entire life. Morales raised his hand. On my command, range goes hot. The line of rifles erupted, the air filled with the chatter of 5.56 meters. The sharp crack of the M27s, the steady thump of the M110s downrange. Brass casings clinked onto the gravel in a frantic chorus. Sand danced in the muzzle blasts. The smell of burnt powder rolled across the line. And then came a sound that didn't belong. Boom. Deeper, slower, heavier. The M1D Garand thundered once, its recoil snapping back into Ray's shoulder with a practiced rhythm, where the recruits fired strings of 3, 5, 10 shots. He delivered only one. Then silence. He inhaled, exhaled, and delivered another boom. The recruits started glancing sideways. The old man wasn't rushing. He wasn't fumbling. Every shot looked ritualized. Breathe. Aim. Squeeze. Follow through, Lawson muttered through clenched teeth. He's wasting time. No way he keeps pace with the clock. Yet doubt flickered across his face when, after each blast, a faint metallic clang carried back from the target line. At 600 meters, even Marines with optics began missing more than they hit. Mirage waves distorted the view, iron sights dancing in the shimmer, but Ray's posture never shifted. He seemed to fold into the rifle, letting the desert and the weapon breathe as one. Morales found himself lowering binoculars he didn't remember picking up. There was something unnerving about the calm, something that cut through the chaos like a blade. Then it happened. The Garand's clip pinged free, the unmistakable sound echoing like a bell through the range. Every Marine on the line froze for half a second. None of them had ever heard it in real life. Ray reached down, loaded another en-bloc clip with steady hands, and, without hesitation, settled back into prone position. This time, his sights were leveled at the 800-meter silhouettes, the targets nobody in Alpha Platoon had ever touched. And when he pressed the trigger, the boom rolled out heavier than before. As if the desert itself was about to bear witness, the range thundered with gunfire. But one sound refused to blend into the storm. The M1D Garand didn't chatter like the M4 carbines or thump like the M110s. It spoke with a deep, measured authority. Each blast rolled across the desert like a hammer dropped on an anvil. Raymond Callahan lay flat in the sand, his body lined up behind the rifle as though welded to it. There was nothing flashy in his posture, no squirming, no wasted movements. He simply became part of the weapon. The desert breathing through him. His hands worked with the calm of a man who had repeated this ritual 1,000 times. At first, the platoon ignored him. Fresh Marines had their own battles fighting nerves, adjusting optics, struggling with trigger squeeze. But soon, they started to notice. Boom, clang, boom, clang. Not every shot echoed, but far more than chance should allow. The Garand barked, and almost every time, a faint metallic ring drifted back from downrange. At 300 meters, Ray's silhouette target came back with a neat, fist-sized cluster in the center. At 400, another. At 600. Staff Sergeant Morales raised his binoculars, then lowered them again, shaking his head as if clearing a mirage. Impossible, he muttered under his breath. The old man wasn't scattering shots like everyone else. He was stacking them. Private Lawson stopped shooting altogether. He pressed his eye to the spotting scope, sweat dripping down his brow, through the wavering desert air. The 800-meter target was barely visible, yet he saw it, clean holes blooming in the chest of the silhouette. Not random hits, a pattern. That can't be real, Lawson whispered, voice cracking. Another clang answered him. Even the Marines on M110 sniper systems were struggling. Mirage bent their sight picture. The wind tugged their rounds wide, but Ray seemed to feel the drift before it happened, adjusting minutely, firing only when everything aligned. His grouping wasn't a perfect single hole. No one alive could do that at 800 meters with iron sights, but it was terrifyingly precise. Several shots clustered tight in the vital zone, the rest still inside a circle small enough to fit under a helmet. Lawson swallowed hard, his earlier insults tasting like ash. When the Garand's en-bloc clip pinged free, the sound cut through the chaos like a bell. Every head turned. None of them had ever heard it in real life, only in films or history reels. Now it rang across Falcon Ridge as proof that history itself was standing beside them. Ray didn't look around. He didn't bask in the silence. He simply reloaded, smooth and steady, and settled back into the prone. By the time Morales' voice finally cracked into a command, Cease fire, the damage was done. The dust hung, the smoke thinned, and the truth was plain. Master Sergeant Raymond Callahan had just outshot every Marine on that line at 800 meters, with a rifle older than their parents and with nothing but iron sights. Whispers rippled across Alpha Platoon. Cheating? No way. How is that possible, Lawson, who had mocked him the loudest, now whispered the only question that mattered. Who is this man? The range crew brought back the targets, one by one, like relics from a battlefield. Marines crowded close, hungry to see. Every silhouette told the same impossible story, clean groupings, tight enough to shame even the platoon's best shooters. The contrast was brutal. The recruits' own targets were chewed with scattered holes, wide and messy. Ray's looked like they had been punched by a machine. And then O'Donnell, the gunnery sergeant, noticed the ammo box. He lifted it, rough hands brushing across the lid. Dozens of faint, knife-carved notches cut into the old wood. The recruits leaned in, eyes wide. Kill marks, Lawson whispered. The word carried both awe and fear, for the first time that day. Ray looked up, his eyes locked on Lawson. They weren't angry. They weren't proud. They were steady like the iron sights he had just used to dismantle every doubt. Not kills. Ray said quietly, "Saves." The single word hit harder than any bullet. Morales frowned, voice soft. Saves. Ray set the rifle down and leaned back. His gaze drifted past the range, past the desert, into another time. His voice was low, but the silence made it carry Vietnam. 1968, Da Nang. My squad was pinned by a sniper. We couldn't see him, but every time someone moved, he fired. Men were dying one by one. I had one chance before he shifted. 400 meters. Iron sights. I squeezed, and my brothers lived. The recruits stood frozen. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Ray's jaw tightened as he went on. Desert Storm. 1991. Convoy ambushed outside Al-Kuwait, an armored vehicle closing fast. If it broke through, 20 Marines were gone. One round, through the driver's hatch. That convoy lived. He tapped the ammo box, his finger landing on the carved notches. More than 40 of these, each one for a life saved. That's what they mean. The words sank in like lead weights. The recruits' faces shifted, mockery gone, replaced with something raw, almost reverent. Ray's tone sharpened. Steel under the calm. You came here today chasing scores. That's why you missed, because you thought you were shooting at paper. I wasn't aiming at targets. I was stopping threats. That's the difference. That's why you lost. He slid the bolt back into place with a decisive click. The sound was final. Like a gavel. Lawson's throat bobbed, but no words came. The same Marine who had laughed the loudest now stood like a boy caught in a storm too big for him. Ray closed the ammo box with a snap. The recruits flinched at the sound, as if a sentence had just been handed down. And as the old Marine rose, slinging the Garand over his shoulder, every man on that line understood the shooting was over. But the real lesson had only just begun. Raymond Callahan walked toward the parking lot, rifle case over his shoulder. Steps slow but steady. The silence behind him felt heavier than all the laughter that had greeted his arrival. No one dared call out until Private Lawson's voice cracked through the stillness. "Master Sergeant, could you maybe teach us?" The old Marine stopped. For a long moment, he didn't turn around. Then, slowly, he pivoted, eyes scanning the line of recruits. The bravado was gone. What stared back at him now wasn't mockery. It was hunger, respect, the kind of silence only real soldiers give, and for the first time that day. Ray smiled, I've been waiting 60 years for someone to ask. 3 weeks later. Word had spread through Falcon Ridge like wildfire. The man who had outshot an entire platoon with a relic was back every Saturday morning. What started with Lawson and a handful of curious Marines became a crowd. Garands, carbines, sniper rifles, it didn't matter what they carried. They came to learn. Ray didn't just drill marksmanship. He taught something deeper: patience, discipline, respect for the weapon. This rifle isn't for scores or bragging rights, he'd say, resting a hand on the Garand's worn stock. It's for keeping your brothers alive. That's the only target that ever mattered. By the end of 6 months, Alpha Platoon posted the highest qualification scores in their battalion's history. Lawson, once the loudest skeptic, earned his expert marksman badge and was tapped for sniper training. But more important than badges was the change in their eyes. Every Marine who trained under Ray understood now that the weapon didn't make the warrior. The warrior made the weapon. Years later, a small bronze plaque was mounted near Lane 20, the place where it all began. The engraving was simple, dedicated to Master Sergeant Raymond Callahan, who taught us that the marks you carry don't measure death, but the lives you save. Ray never mentioned the plaque. He never needed to. Every Saturday morning, he still showed up at Falcon Ridge, ammo box in hand, Garand across his shoulder. He sat up quietly, nodded once at the new faces waiting for him, and began the lesson all over again. Because that's what true warriors do. They don't chase glory, they pass it on. The measure of a soldier is not in the battles he's fought, but in the lives he's protected and the lessons he leaves behind.